And recording is on.
Thanks for the reminder. Let me repeat that again. So be sure to follow the code of conduct, and then be mindful that this is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, just don't say anything you don't want to be recorded. And then for the discussion today, we want to focus on getting the agreement on the must items of the AI conformance before we move on to should. And must means that it's mandatory, and should is recommendation of the direction. And then I also added new information in the must requirements as suggestions of potentially how we can test this to make it easier for people to bring more clarity on those requirements. But the test is not required for the first version, and then we might add performance tests later next year. So I prepared a doc that summarized the comments in the original doc, and I only focus on the must requirements. This is for facilitating the discussion. So let's focus on the first one. The first one is about accelerator management. And
Janet,
this
we
is
have a hand raised. Malo, go ahead.
Hi. I just have a general concern, which is that I see that we're calling out specific technology, and I don't know if that's appropriate. So I'm going to poke at Q just because there's multiple batch schedulers, including Volcano, which is an incubation project. And I understand that that should and not in the must category. But as we go through these, I'd like to make sure that we're not tied to specific projects, but rather requirements around those projects. I don't know what other feelings are.
So we'll get to that after we finish the must requirements. And I have that in mind as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So are there any more questions?
Hey, Janet, this is Derek, and I can't find the hand raise button, so I apologize. But I missed last week's meeting, but one of the things that would help me a little bit, and maybe this was covered in last week, and if so, I apologize, is when evaluating must versus should, it's still not entirely clear to me what user audience or specific use case guides a must or a should. Am I looking at this as saying the Kubernetes environment described here is doing both training and inference, or just doing a subset of that? I don't know. I guess if this was covered previously, I apologize, but I'm personally having trouble knowing what lens to use on must versus should, absent like a particular use case as being described as must.
Thanks for the question. So let me reshare the original conformance doc. So I got some feedback about what are the use cases as well. So basically there's a section about the guiding use cases. And in general, we are looking at the modern AI use in Kubernetes. So that includes training or fine-tuning or inferencing or other new things that's coming up, such as agents. So we want to cover all those use cases.
I guess the part that I'm struggling with, and I'll pause and let others come in, is the adjectives that go in front of some of these words, like large scale or high performance. Like to me, there's there's Kubernetes environments that might be built to support like frontier model providers who might be doing, you know, training and or fine tuning and or inference at that scale. And that's one segment of a potential user population. I could imagine reading this conformance definition and finding value. And I'm trying to map that to like the other segment of a user population that might be doing AI workloads with commercial off-the-shelf models, maybe at a smaller scale in their individual enterprise. And it's not clear to me if this document is intended to serve both audiences or just one of those audiences, if that makes sense. And I think that's like I'm curious if others may have that same question or confusion, or even Janet, like how you approach this when writing this. But if I'm like an Anthropic or an OpenAI or Google or anyone else doing like, you know, frontier model development or massive inference at scale, I might have a different perspective than if I'm, you know, deploying an agentic AI workload in my enterprise with less extreme usage characteristics.
Before I answer, I want to see if others want to respond or have the same.
I wanted to add some context. Yes, this was brought up, you know, in addition to what Janet said, and she tried to cover in the use cases. This was brought up earlier, and I think we even last week covered this in the meeting. There was an intentional approach or direction to not multiply the number of profiles that we want to create and to create just one, right? Like there is, so far, you know, if we forget about this working group, there is a one Kubernetes conformance profile, like you are conformant with Kubernetes cluster or not. And even before AI was cool, there is many different use cases that Kubernetes covers, right? So when we created this work stream and started to discuss these ideas, I think it's ultimately up to us, to this group, to make a decision. You know, we could go the path of, you know, actually the use cases are so different, and the environments, as you were saying, Derek, like, you know, there could be an edge environment, and then there could be a big cloud provider environment, that we will have to separate these into different profiles. And how do they look like, and how do people certify on those? I think the trade-off is that is going to make it more complex to track, but it's a possibility, right? So, like, sorry, going too long, but the long story short is that I think we initially are trying to keep it under one profile, with the trade-off that, yes, you know, it may be too ambitious and generic to cover all these different use cases that you were talking about, which are very real.
Yeah, you know, just to add, I agree with the need to handle the wide variety, because there's lots of situations that are maybe not large scale. And, you know, I know of many that need to be handled, and people are using Kubernetes in those situations today. And so the providers that support those kinds of environments, they should be able to get the AI conformance in some way, shape, or form. And if we only do one profile, then I think that profile needs to be flexible enough to handle the large scale high performance environments, and kind of, I think the word earlier, you know, was more edge, and the other environments needs to be flexible to handle those, because both are already happening. And so if it's going to be one profile, we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, if I can, sorry, jump the queue to answer to that with my thoughts. I think everybody also understands that if everything becomes a should, then the program has no value, right? So, like, we are in this delicate balance between covering all the use cases, be flexible, and at the same time, you know, agree on a couple of things that are different than the regular Kubernetes conformant profile, because otherwise, yeah, the program is like, this new profile is meaningless.
So I guess I'm trying to look at this just from the perspective of we could, I appreciate wanting to have one profile, but I guess when evaluating a topic here, just getting it down to like one clarified use case is helpful. And then asking if that use case is informing all others, we could do that later. I just feel like the conversation's getting kind of skewed to like a all use cases are under discussion, which almost then makes it hard for me to know as a consumer of this document. Let's say like I work at Red Hat and we're applying AI inside my company. Should I evaluate how I apply AI inside our company by saying it needs to have all these elements, even if I'm not necessarily at the same scale as an Anthropic or an OpenAI or others? And so I guess what I'm wondering is like when we go through the first list here and we're evaluating must or shoulds, like just so we all are on the same page with each other, it's helpful for me to understand like if I was at an OpenAI or an Anthropic, I would say this is a must. But then I also feel like it's fair to have a way of saying if I was at a different class of organization, I do not think this was a must. It feels like right now I don't have a way to articulate that in this framing, and I just want to be able to reserve room for that. And so I basically when evaluating must or shoulds, I just don't know how to respond with the yes, if I was in that environment, it's a must, but in no, if I'm in that environment, it's not. Like I can appreciate that the audience needs to be made a little crisper, I guess, if that makes sense.
I think that maybe we are diving too fast into technicalities in this, because I think the original idea was to have a conformance program that establishes Kubernetes as the de facto standard for running any kind of AI machine learning platform as an underlying layer, and Kubernetes and all adjacent projects bring in the stack to solidify this, so that basically any company can point to, hey, we are Kubernetes conformant, and we have the superset of being AI conformant to, and the product that we sell you can use, and it is basically conformant within a conformance scope that the community created. And also the idea is to have it as a starting point. I mean, we all see how fast the whole area is evolving and the separations, and I think there will always be a change of shoulds to must, and maybe even musts to shoulds, and also potentially limiting those for specific use cases, so that you, for example, say in a super edge environment case, and the platform that is then being provided is super specific for this edge case, which I still do not think that we will ever run into this issue when I look at the current people who are doing the Kubernetes conformance test, because usually all of the platforms sort of could be run in all of the environments. It's just like a different way to handle this. So the platform itself is usually compliant with all of the options, but you can only use a certain specific out of this. And I think this is the view that people should use to look at this conformance program, in my opinion. And
Yeah,
sorry for not having a clearer.
I appreciate the ways of evaluating the program. I guess what I'm just trying to figure out is to the question of going through musts and shoulds, and I won't say any more after this, is it's trying to get to a lot of crispness of the solution, but I don't feel like I have the same crispness of the problem statement. Or as a reader of the potential document, I don't know if my company or industry is relevant to the guidance that this document is giving. Like, if I am an enterprise doing applied AI in my environment, how should I parse this document? Like, the problem statement is what I was just trying to see if we could get a little more expanded on before driving into the solution. But I can't tell if I'm alone in that feeling.
Justin?
I share some of your concerns, Derek. I think, though, that one thing we should differentiate between is, like, we're not saying that an AI conformance cluster must have 8 H100s or whatever it is, or 1,000 H100s. We're saying, I think, if it has 8 H100s, you should be able to access that functionality via this, like, cross industry standard protocol. And we're certainly hoping that's DRA. If we've done a good job, right, like on DRA, then we hope that that will be the way, and that we can avoid a lot of these sort of specifics, right? Because we're saying, look, you use DRA and it works whether you have, a small edge AI accelerator farm or a couple of AI accelerators, or whether you have like a 1,000 H100s or 10,000 H100s and you're training the next frontier model. Like, the point is that from the conformance profile standard, we would like you to address that via likely DRA, but some Kubernetes API, rather than some weird annotation that is like says GKE or whatever it might be in there, right? That I think is the goal of the conformance profile, rather than, or that's one way we have to play here.
So zooming into the DRA mention here, right? Like, I love DRA. I've been involved in it from the beginning. But if we take the edge use case, right? It's perfectly valid that on the edge someone has a single GPU and they are just happy specifying it with the non-DRA way using device plugins. So the question is it fair to put a must in front of DRA when they can just say, oh, I have one GPU. I don't need to distinguish among them. I can just say, for example, nvidia.com /GPU1, I get it. Why do I need to enable additional features? And it will work perfectly fine for inference anyways. Just playing devil's advocate here.
Maybe to jump on this, the conformance test is not targeting the end user. The conformance test is targeting vendors like and projects like OpenShift, GKE, AKS, and so on and so forth. It's not so much that your thing that you run in your system is conformant. It's that products are conformant with Kubernetes, or distributions are conformant with this.
Right. So end users are not forced to use AI in a certain way, but if they want it, they can get a platform that's AI conformant, that has the features or API enabled as promised in the program. That's what we want to achieve, so that users can have a realistic expectations about what the platform would offer. Yuan?
Yeah, not sure if this helps answer the question, but there is one item in the open questions document regarding precondition to a must requirement. So like sometimes you can, depending on the use case and scenario, the verification status can be not applicable. So yeah, maybe that would help with different use cases for certain requirements. Number 5.
This is what you're saying, right? Or maybe I shared this one. Okay. Status can be not applicable, and then you can provide a justification. If there are no more hands, Should we go ahead, continue the discussion about the requirements? And then the questions around use cases might brought up. All right, so first one is about accelerator management. This is about the DRA. So it'll be easier if I go back to the doc, pull up the specific requirements we're talking about. So the first one is about the DRA API. You need to enable that API. And the other two are more future looking. So even that there's no standard yet for things like attributes, we recommend keeping only the first item and then moving the other two as must, as should, instead of must. And I would like to hear the feedback from the community firsthand.
Excuse me, are you sharing your screen?
Yes.
I think we can see it. Yeah, I can see it.
Thank you. Then
Next hand.
So probably okay, yeah. So I think I covered the concern around like edge use cases with DRA, and the other thing is I think like what we really need with DRA is a lot of production ready vendor drivers. So right now I don't think we have even a single one. So we have a chicken and egg here recommending that DRA should be enabled. Like we should have enough production drivers to say that the API has been exercised enough to recommend that it should always be enabled. And then of course, we should talk about profiles where DRA may not be necessary, such as on Edge.
So let me clarify that the requirement is about just enabling the DRA API. And I know that certain features, for example, DRA drivers might not be all mature yet on all platforms. So we're not mandating that as a requirement, but just enabling the DRA API, which just went GA now, would help the community move forward with the direction of using DRA as a way for mitigating the hardware vendor.
Yeah, so I think I agree with Jack. If you want to go ahead, Jack, I'll just.
Evet, aslında reingetan, ja.
Who's
I
the
think Matt,
next
you're on
one?
deck.
All right. Yeah. I want to agree. If DRA is just on by default in Kubernetes, then when that comes out saying it has to be there, I mean, for it not to be there, somebody would have to go in and disable it then in their distro, if it's provided by default with Kubernetes. So if that's the case, I can see that being on by default. The others, though, I have to agree that they should not be musts, because same reason. If we look at the main hardware vendors in this space, they don't have fully formed DRA yet that's able to do everything we're expecting from it, and most of the platforms are probably going to use or partner with the AMDs and the NVIDIAs of the world to do this. And if they aren't ready for it, and then the platform providers who have to take their work and build upon it are expected to meet this to get the standard, it's it's not possible. And so until the major players are ready for DRA, I don't think it can be a requirement that all of that be there.
So
Yeah.
are you saying that you agree that the DRA API enablement can be a
Yeah,
must
I'm okay with
requirement.
DRA being enabled. I mean, our distros would have to turn it off, which we're not going to do. But it's the actually expecting certain characteristics out of it related to the hardware until the major vendors have their portion done. We probably don't expect every company and every platform to build it for the vendors themselves. We're going to wait and collaborate with them until their stuff is done and ready. We can't put this at a must.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement that we're not going to put the other two items here as a must. We're going to change that to should. So does anyone have more opinion about that change? If not, we can just make that change.
I do.
So
Oh, go ahead, Jack. No, you're first. Go.
yeah, so I wanted to speak to this really quick. So I'm definitely +1 in changing that to a should, because it's not really feasible to be a must, as folks have pointed out. I think from a longer term perspective, that accelerator driver and runtime management category really describes the DRA experience. So that first one about just enabling the DRA APIs, that's a sort of like make sure the capabilities are there to be used. But I do think that there is user value in having sort of experiential guarantees. Like I create, to Matt's point, I use his distro to build a Kubernetes cluster, which runs, includes a node pool, which I know has first-class support for DRA. So I think it is reasonable as a user to get value out of that Kubernetes cluster distro experience, bootstrapping those node pools, running that DRA capable hardware with the DRA drivers fully installed and ready to go. The challenge is that is always, this is in the comments that I left in the doc too. This is always going to be a moving target. It's going to be highly fluid over time because there's an infinite number of hardware vendors out there. And not only that, but DRA itself is very, very heterogeneous. There's not like a single set of DRA APIs or a single set of behaviors. And that's by design, like the API is meant to be flexible. So it's almost like, this is just a sort of comment maybe to consider for the longer term for this group. It's almost like we would want to split off and have a separate way of managing sort of hardware vendor to DRA capabilities, so that we is there something as like a blessed hardware certification or something like that with respect to Kubernetes and DRA. I don't know how we can do it under like AI conformance generally, because it's just going to be too heterogeneous and fluid.
Yeah, and also eventually all those requirements needs to be testable. So we need to figure out how to test those requirements as well. Any other thoughts about the change?
I'm going to defer, I think, to John, because I think he probably has the same comments that I do regarding trying to get the DRA drivers to play nicely.
Maybe some of the same comments. Thanks, Marlo. So, and Rita just put it in the chat too. And like, we probably do want to do something like Gateway has done with the drivers for some sort of conformance program. And then maybe once we have that, then like you can layer into this program something like, for the accelerators that you're using in this cluster, you use a conforming DRA driver or something like that, right? So that way we kind of connect them, but like Jack was saying, like everybody's been saying, like we still haven't figured out what, like there's many different features, and you'll use the features in the DRA API as a vendor, but depending on what your device supports and what you need. So it's sort of like we have to figure out how to evaluate them for conformance in that way. And so that'll be like almost a separate program. But I'd love for it to be under the auspices of this working group. I'm totally up for that.
Sounds good. I think we can evolve the conformance Is there more hints about these items, or can we move forward to the next one?
Maybe just one last comment. It's related, I promise. So given that there is a separate thing that we want to track, kind of like the Gateway API, does it make sense to have this in this conformance profile as a should? Because it's always going to be a moving target. Like, look at the Gateway API link, right?
So you're proposing that we add should requirements for.
Sorry?
I said you're saying that we add should requirements for DRA drivers as well.
I'm saying like should, like doesn't make sense that this requirement is a should even, because my understanding of the should is it's a temporary thing, right? It's a should until we can graduate it to a must. But if we have a separate place to track DRA driver maturity or feature parity or whatever, that's a separate thing that is being tracked, going to be tracked by the DRA community. Doesn't make sense to do it here because it doesn't look like it's going to be graduating.
Well, can I respond to that? I don't know what folks think, but if we did take the idea of creating a conformance program for DRA drivers into this working group, then we could almost here say, like, we can make this an indirection, right? We could say, okay, we must enable the DRA API, and you should use a conforming DRA driver. And we are also, that's a separate part of this same working group, same program, but it's just a separate certification of some sort. And then right now we can just take these requirements and just make them the only requirements in that, and they can be shoulds or something. I don't know, like exactly, but like just, I think what you're suggesting, Rita, is like, we don't want to come back to the main certification every time and change it for every detail, but let's make an indirection and kind of bucket that over there in a separate program, but part of the same working group.
I am also going a step further, which is to say we're doing a must right now, right? But as we revisit all the should, if we don't see a should will ever graduate to a must, I'm questioning the value of the should. Because it's different from not applicable, right? Not applicable means like, right, that it doesn't make sense. But a should in my mind means it's just temporary. Eventually it will be a must.
So if I could just, I know I'm kind of going back and forth without following the hands, I'm sorry, but I spent a lot of time on the regular conformance program, and we always struggled with optional features, things like RBAC. RBAC is technically not part of conformance. You can have a Kubernetes cluster that's a conforming, a Kubernetes distribution that's a conforming distribution, even if it doesn't support RBAC, because it's an optional feature within Kubernetes. And so we've always had this bit of a struggle. And I think that that's a little bit of a problem, because we want to make sure that if you implement RBAC, you do it the same way everybody else does it. Otherwise, all the manifests in the world won't work on your cluster. And so we've never really closed that gap. And it would be nice if we could start without that gap in this program. And maybe the should is a way to do that. That's kind of how I've been thinking about it.
So I guess the thing, I put it on the side chat, but one thing I'm a little I guess maybe John is a good person to answer this one as a K8's conformance, but would we include DRA API testing in the conformance program as is eventually for distributions?
Yes, it will be there actually in 134, because it's the API itself is not an optional feature.
But we would not require vendors to have a DRA driver implementation.
Well, we can't really do that because you might not even need it in your cluster. You might not have any devices that need it, right?
So like it would just be executing, making sure the APIs are valid, which seems to be, would be eventually covering the must from the K8's conformance. right?
Yeah, true. So you wouldn't be is it a presupposition of the AI conformance that you are a conforming Kubernetes cluster in general?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So this could be subsumed in that. I mean, I do want to make sure we encourage, vendors to move to DRA. So yeah, it seems this might be a little redundant. So I'll leave that up to everybody here, whether they want to keep it or not. But I think if we had the should that says you should use, it eventually becomes a must, that you must use a conforming DRA driver for any devices that need plugin support, then that would also help. So we just don't have that program yet either on how to create conforming DRA drivers. So I don't know, Gianna, what do you think about that? Or I see Mario's got a hand up. I'll stop talking.
So this is written before DRA API even went GA, so that's why there could be potential overlapping with the standard conformance.
Maybe to and also I want to jump on what John said a couple of minutes ago. There is I like the idea that basically eventually there will be a conformance program for hardware vendors to get like hardware that is DA conformant and providing DA conformant drivers and stuff like this. I think this is also the larger idea that I mean, currently we only have the Kubernetes conformance program. We have a lot of projects inside of the CNCF who might also benefit from a conformance program in the future, and there will potentially also be conformance programs that are cross projects, and I think that as a hardware vendor, this also offers a possibility for the hardware vendor to say like, hey, we are building conformant hardware and driver support. And I would agree that then this AI conformance is just referencing to, hey, you should use, or you should be able to use DAA conformant hardware inside of your cluster or XYZ. And to add to the, I wrote it in the chat, but we are now following the Kubernetes conformance, but it's the second conformance program in the CNCF that is ever being created. So maybe we should orientate on the Kubernetes conformance program, but I would not follow it down to the point.
Just a
It's
quick,
actually the third one, because the gateway one, sorry to just break in, but and I want to make this point. The gateway one, we talked to the folks who put that together when they started it, and we talked about like the optional things and this, and they made a much more sophisticated conformance program than we have for Kubernetes itself. And I think it's been successful. I haven't synced up with those guys in a long time, but if you've talked to them, some of them are probably here, and learn from their experiences, I think that could be super helpful because they did something much better than what we have in core Kubernetes.
So just quickly to speak to the should must part, I do think that if there's a reasonable path forward where if we define, for example, in this sort of like ancillary area under us, something like a set of DRA conformant driver implementations, and if we also inherit from those standard DRA drivers a set of hardware that those DRA drivers are required to run, then we can make statements like, to be an AI conformant platform provider, I'll use GB200 from NVIDIA as an example. If I, as a platform provider, give you a Kubernetes cluster running nodes that are backed by GB200s, those nodes should be ready to go. Because GB200s, let's just say, they need those DRA drivers. This is sort of the way that NVIDIA is providing the holistic experience, as far as I can tell. And as a platform provider, it seems reasonable. We could that sounds like an achievable scope of stuff that we can maintain a list of like blessed DRA driver vendors, and within that blessed hardware that those drivers are meant to drive. So yeah, if I build a Kubernetes cluster with GB200, I should expect to be able to use that out of the box. I shouldn't expect that I have to go and manually install, let's say, the GPU operator and configure it for DRA, have that separate user burden on top of that experience. That seems to be user value add from an like AI conformant standpoint. Like I can get a GP200 that just works. So that to me can get into a must if we can organize things that way. And also, I think to Rita's point, that's testable. Like in the way that I've tested Kubernetes conformant clusters in the past, as a platform provider, I could go through that experience and demonstrate using CLI output that GB200 functionality was provided out of the box by that platform to get me to a conformance standard.
Yeah, sounds good. I think we can have some high level requirements in the AI conformance that recommends something that other sub area recommends. George, you're talking about Marlo's concern. I haven't seen the comment. Do you want to say?
Just talking about the concern from the beginning of the call.
This is the kingmaker versus like us just saying these are examples. Like I think I tried to explain it in the chat.
Yeah, I just made another comment. Make sure you guys can see the thread in the comment.
Right. Like, yeah, I definitely +1 on don't want to make kingmakers. But sometimes we need to provide examples to make it more clear what this requirement is about.
Right. There are some requirements about certain frameworks, and we put some examples as those frameworks.
I think it may be better to say what specifically in there that should be supported. So for instance, Q has job set, and it has, but some people are also using pod group and leader worker set. So it's not even a complete example.
Perhaps it would be useful to specifically note that this is an example. And as Marlo said, like have that be a specific section in the doc. Go ahead.
The main concern was around like if somebody is like a Kubeflow platform and they're not using Q or job set, I don't think there's no reason why that should not be conformant. It's just not what Kubernetes, it's not an API provided by Kubernetes. And this is where I like seeing these call outs. Like I have no issues with saying like an AI platform should offer a queuing solution, and you should probably have some representation of a distributed job. Here are some examples. But if you say like you must or even you should be implementing queue, that kind of gets a little bit, that's a little worse in my opinion. Like we have a lot of like part of it is we're calling out this as a CNCF conformance, and there are a lot of projects in the CNCF that might not even have some of these support.
Yeah, maybe we should like remove the mentions of specific technologies in the should and must descriptions, and then add like one sentence or one separate paragraph similar to what we've done for how we might test it paragraph. Like we can add something like what example, like some examples of how we might test it using certain solutions instead.
So I think, Kevin, your feedback is mainly around queue and job set instead of other examples, right?
I mean, auto scaling is another one where I'm not actually like I'm a little worried about. Like I don't know with node pools if like cluster autoscaler or Carpenter both implement the same thing. I don't like I'm not as familiar with auto scaling, but generally like I worry that some of it is more implementation details than like the actual like request that someone is providing, like a solution like this. So I think that's kind of where, like, that's at least my opinion.
So for auto scaling, the requirement here is about the support of auto scaling accelerators, but not specifically about how you implement the auto scaler, if that's the concern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if, I guess I am not as familiar with auto scaling. Like if it's like saying, you know, you could use cluster auto scaler or Carpenter or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like we just want to auto scale like what we call node groups, fine. And if that's the case, but like I don't like, this is where like it gets a little weird because this is cluster autoscaler and there is a cluster autoscaler project from Kubernetes. So I don't know if that's like we're saying that this is our solution and don't, and I guess, or equivalent is fine. All right. I see that now.
Yeah, this is not about the autoscaler itself. It's just about autoscaling accelerators, if that helps.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I think if the scheduler orchestration one, a similar problem there where we want the concept, not necessarily the implementation, I'd be happy with that.
It's also possible that your platform doesn't have autoscaler at all, and I think it's fine. You can just say not applicable and then put justification. For example, on-prem it might not be applicable to on-prem clusters. John, you have a hand.
Yeah, it sounds like, and since I haven't been closely involved, maybe this has already been discussed, but right, we have sort of 3 tiers of support for anything. There's like capability, and saying this cluster is capable of some operation. And then we have the API for controlling that operation, and then we have the implementation. And we have to decide. Typically, we don't do conformance on the implementation. In the Kubernetes conformance program, we do it on the API. And then in here, we're doing a mix, I think, of APIs and capabilities. And so, like, ideally, we would get to a point where hopefully, where it's all done at the API level, because that's what allows kind of the interoperability of manifests and things. But there are many cases where either that's not feasible near term or maybe never feasible. So, but we still want to ensure that people have the capability. So I guess it might be helpful, like some of the concerns about kingmakers, I think, come out of when it gets attached to the wrong level the requirement gets attached to the wrong level there. So that might be just a useful framework for thinking about each of these requirements and how we categorize them.
Right. In terms of queue and job set, those are added there because it's easier to test the API instead of the behavior. And those are projects within the Kubernetes 6 instead of a CNCF project.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going to be complicated to test a lot of these. Like I'm excited to see these here, but like at the end of the day, like gang scheduling is a pretty vague ask, and like how the Kubernetes scheduler itself doesn't support gang scheduling. So how are you, like, we would have to choose a technology to actually do that test. And that's kind of where I get nervous. Like for should, like, the topic of this one was supposed to be on the must, so I'm okay to table this one. But like this is where like it gets kind of, it concerns me because I don't even know how you would actually write a conformance test for most of these things that wasn't like in turn like testing queue or job set, and these aren't even these aren't part of the core Kubernetes itself right now.
Right. So we only have 4 minutes left. So at least we can say that this one is closed for the first item. And then we know that we're not going to focus on recommending specific implementation, but focus on API level when we can. And are there more hands?
I just want to, in the last couple minutes, it would be nice if George was saying to explain a little bit more about the 10,000 foot view of what exactly we're trying to go with. And lots of people are thumbing that up. So I'd like to make sure we do that before the meeting ends.
Thank you. Hi. I haven't really addressed the group in a long time since the early days, so I figured I would take some time to talk about it from the CNCF perspective, because I know that we are talking a lot about implementation details and things like that. So I just wanted to remind everybody that the goal for Atlanta for us from the CNCF perspective is to have a rough draft. We've resigned that we are going to argue about this for the next 3 years and all the little implementation details. So I would just like to remind everyone, feel free to just punt on something, but give us a draft, like close the loop for us, because I think we made great progress today. But I also see the size of the little scroll bar in the document, and I know this document is only ever going to get bigger. So I just wanted to remind people that we want to keep it generic, but also we want to launch in Atlanta. So is that vibing with people, or am I totaling wrong? Because on that.
That's good. We see a lot of thumb up.
Yeah, because what we really want to say in Atlanta is basically we're going to take the same level of care with these AI APIs as we do with the Kubernetes API. It's very much a process-driven thing. Like we are focusing on the artifact as well, but I just want to ensure that we're also focusing on the processes to generate this artifact to ensure that we are rigged for long-term running as far as people being able to bring up concerns on the different levels and the musts and the shoulds. Does that make sense too? And that's basically all I have, unless anyone has questions. Well, cool. Thank you so much for participating. And if you have any questions, you can always ping me on Slack and all of that stuff. So.
Thank you, George. All right, I think we're at time, and we are going to discuss the rest of the requirements in the next meeting.
All right, thanks
all.
everyone. Have a great evening, and I will stop the recording.